Hear these words from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will be led, and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." Thanks be to God for this living word. When Jesus and his closest followers arrive in Jerusalem, in the time leading up to Jesus' arrest, he spends a lot of time in and around the temple. It's in the courts of the temple that Jesus has debated the religious leaders. It's here that he has taught in parable. He has worshipped here and made offering. In the temple, he witnessed a poor widow put a few cents in the offering, and he declared it the greatest treasure of all. I love this story that we read today because it really humanizes, I think, the disciples in a new way. We see the sheer wonder in the face of this magnificent giant temple made of such large stones. It's a wonder how they got put in the place that they were. The courts and the halls and the rooms of the temple are so decked out in extravagant decor that a few disciples express their awe to Jesus. Though they've witnessed amazing things and have given up so much to follow this poor teacher, they are still taken aback at the big city. Some of these disciples are country boys. They're used to the small town life. And I love that we see one disciple's exclamation at what was likely the biggest building he'd ever seen. And while still in awe of the great achievement of the architecture, staring up at the large stones, Jesus announces that this large complex of buildings in the temple will be torn down into rubble, surely breaking the disciple out of this moment of spectacle. I can't recommend making a habit out of copying Jesus here. I don't think this response of his is very popular. He's a bit of a buzzkill. Imagine stepping into Ford Field and telling your friend who's shocked at the size of an NFL stadium that it will one day be torn down, made into a pile of concrete and steel. Or when you're overlooking the view from the Empire State Building, that skyline you're looking at will be leveled any day now. Your vacation tours may be soured if you meet your group's wonder with similar proclamations of coming destruction. Where his disciples see a major accomplishment of engineering and labor that is the temple, Jesus can only see the failures of its present form and to the inevitable future. Jesus hasn't outright rejected the temple. He's still here worshiping. But he does reject many of its errors, and he prophesies its coming destruction. He sees a failing institution that will not last forever. And that insight gives Jesus a totally different vision than the disciples. Though they look upon the same temple, they see radically different things. Does anyone here happen to remember the 1988 film They Live? No? I'm seeing some no's. So this is a John Carpenter directed movie starring Roddy Piper. Basically, in a world very much like our own 1980s, a man stumbles across a pair of sunglasses that offer special sight to him when he puts them on. When you put them on, ordinary things suddenly look very, very different. Like normal advertisements for a vacation or for some product, suddenly now say, when he puts on the glasses, consume or obey or reproduce. Money, when looked through these sunglasses, now shows the message, this is your God. Billboards, magazines, TV, all begin to reveal their true nature. And the message behind them, when you put on the glasses, isn't for a particular product, but rather for the act of consumption itself. The act of getting caught up in that cycle that is distracting. Stay asleep, no thought, one sign reads. This is why, why is this reality hidden from our sight, we might ask? Well, the glasses answer that question too. They show that some of the people who are walking down the street, who appear to be normal, those news anchors on TV, are not in fact human, but are these gruesome aliens disguising themselves as such. They've hidden away into the population in order to amass the Earth's resources, and they raise the temperature of the Earth to a more habitable climate for them. No one is able to see them normally. Everything looks normal, but these sunglasses reveal the true world. Though They Live is ultimately more of a goofy sci-fi movie than one with that's concerned with a coherent message, and that I can't really necessarily recommend watching. Those glasses, though, are a powerful image, I think, of having a prophetic perspective on life, and to the lack thereof, being oblivious to the nature of the things that we think of as normal. Philosopher Slavoj Žižek famously uses that film, They Live, when he talks about ideology, those systems of thought that seem natural to us, that they're hard to escape from. But critique, like the glasses, reveals the contradictions in those ideologies, reveals the failures behind them. If imagining Jesus with a pair of sunglasses isn't sacrilege to you, then we can think of Jesus looking at the temple with those prophetic glasses on. The disciples marvel at its size, but what Jesus sees is ruins. He doesn't only see this because he has some perfect vision of the future. I'll leave to you the questions of the incarnation and about free will in the future to decide for yourself if Jesus perfectly knew all of the future. And Rome did indeed destroy the temple that Jesus and his disciples prayed in the year 70 CE, along with major portions of Jerusalem. The art, the gold, all of that beauty held within the temple was looted and brought back to Rome. And two of these stones are stones that were cast down from the walls that are still there today. The signs of this coming destruction were visible. Jesus surely knew that Rome was too powerful of a force to revolt against, and he regularly discouraged his followers from thinking that some violent overthrowing would somehow establish the kingdom of God. Instead, he encouraged that mustard seed approach. But Jesus also didn't offer a timeline for this coming destruction, even when a few of his disciples asked him for one privately. Because I think Jesus was emphasizing instead the failure of the temple, and predicting that though it appears to hold such wealth and appears so grand, it would one day fall, and faith would continue in its absence. When Jesus puts on those prophetic glasses, he doesn't just see the temple's endpoint. He sees its shortcomings now. He has seen those those with authority in the temple who lord their position over others, who take the seat of pride, and in doing so, who attempt to keep others out from their own encounter with God. He's already turned over the tables and driven out the businessmen who have sought to profit off of a monopoly on the sacrifices that are made in the temple. Again, keeping out others from encountering God. He has seen the offerings that are made on behalf of the emperor, which were mandatory under Roman rule. Be it wealth or status or power, Jesus sees through and rejects what so many see as normal. And just before this, he has seen that poor widow, who no one else took notice of, drop a few coins into the offering. Perhaps this is what comes to his mind when he sees the great stones of the temple being thrown down. He does praise her faith. He says that she is given more than any other, but not because she is a model of what every poor person ought to do, rather because her faith is a real one and she is being taken advantage of. Because despite the extravagances of the temple that the disciples wonder at, despite the wonderful festivals and the great sacrifices, this poor widow is still not cared for in this world which rejects any economic autonomy of women. Jesus lifts up this woman to contrast her with the wealthy, who give to receive positions of authority, who celebrate and praise in the temple, but do not care for the needy. His prophetic perspective, his glasses, are like the prophets who came before him. Hosea, who declares God's words as, "I desire mercy, not sacrifices." Or Amos, I despise your religious festivals. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen, but let justice roll down like a river. With this perspective, Jesus looks upon the temple and sees it for what it is. Though he worships there and teaches in its walls, he sees it as a pile of rubble. He knows that it cannot last. When the disciples leave the city that evening and gather on the Mount of Olives, which is a stark contrast to the man-constructed temple, Jesus gives instructions to his disciples when they ask about how to anticipate this predicted destruction he speaks of. This section in Mark is sometimes called the little apocalypse because Jesus uses some of that same language of that genre of apocalypse. It was the style of prophetic discourse at the time. Now, the disciples are very concerned about what will happen next. They want to know when the end will come. They want to know how they'll know that it's coming, which was not unexpected, too. And this is also predominantly how this message has been read throughout history. This passage has been mined for secrets about the end times. But Jesus does not give a time. And actually, he isn't even focused on one final moment. He's talking about the temple, which was destroyed very shortly after his life. The age that Jesus speaks of isn't some far-off one. He does speak about his return and how the disciples are to have hope in that day, to be watchful for it. But the new age has already come. Jesus is already inaugurating it. Though the disciples hope for a quick fix to this world and a sudden reversal of everything, Jesus does not give the answers that they want. He does use their language, the language of the end, and he reverts it. It is already here, he says, and yet you must also await its arrival. God has already broken into the world. It just didn't look the way that you expected it to. Jesus calls us to become an end-time people who both anticipate the future but also live differently in light of the kingdom which Christ has brought. There's a theory among some scholars of the Bible who say that the reason that Christianity looked so radically different from the rest of the world back at its first inception was that they did believe that an end was imminent. Therefore, the wealthy would be more willing to give freely of their own possessions. Women were given positions of authority, and radical nonviolence was genuinely accepted as a way of life. And then, as time passed, these exceptions were slowly removed. Power was reallocated. Women were once again subjected. I'm not in complete agreement with this theory. I do think that Jesus wasn't making end-time exceptions when he spoke about the inclusion of all, nor were many of the first Christians as well. Instead, they were living in the outpouring of the Spirit, which revealed that God meant it when they said that all are made in the image of God. However, I do think that this theory accounts for how the church fell away so quickly. As the church became established, it became like the temple. It makes sense, this theory makes sense of why the church became comfortable over time, why it cozied up with Rome, becoming the official religion just 300 years later. The urgency was gone, and the ways of the world crept back in. When asked when this new age will come, Jesus doesn't answer. Instead, he gives instructions on how to live. The new age had come in the coming of Jesus. To enter it, one must only adopt the prophetic perspective of Jesus. That's what the end is really all about for him. Perspective. Seeing with the vision that God has actually been seeing with all along. That all are made in the image of God. All are deserving of our love too. When we look at our world, at the temples of our own day, whatever form that they take, do we take them for granted? Do we see the world around us and say, that's just the way things are? Or do we interrogate what is said to be normal, what is said to be natural? Do we put on the same glasses that Christ did, which reveal those being kept from encountering God, those being manipulated, those being taken advantage of? As I joked at the beginning of the sermon, copying Jesus in this pattern too frequently is sure to make us into buzzkills. But we are given this vision of the world by God to share it, to break the illusion that the world suffers under. We are to speak the truth and name the reality, not to let the institutions which inflict harm to do so as if all is normal. In this story of the temple, Jesus' prophetic perspective is one primarily of critique. And we too have much that we need to critique today. But these lenses show us more than just failings. They show us the hidden beauty too. The beauty of every single person that we meet. The beauty of a bare tree. The joy in those little things that go unnoticed by a rushing world. We put on this perspective, seeing the sin of our world not for the sake of superiority or the sake of our own suffering having seen it, but for the sake of beauty. The wonderful glimpses of grace that reside here among us, and the chance to participate in building God's kingdom, that no one may be kept away from God's presence, that all may know God. All may know God's peace, God's flourishing grace and blessing. God, grant us this vision, that we may see as you see.